5 years can be an eternity in politics. Addressing youths in the north of Paris during the 2012 presidential campaign, François Hollande declared that, if elected, he wanted to be judged by one objective. Will young people be better off in 2017 than in 2012? His bold challenge helped draw a solid majority of the youth vote, 62% of the 25-24 year range, but it would soon become a bitter indictment of his presidency, ending with Hollande becoming a ghost-like occupant of the Élysée Palace awaiting his replacement. Emmanuel Macron, his successor who was inaugurated Sunday, promised his own Camelot-style renewal. But Macron's youth vote was disappointingly low for a figure who styled himself as a usurper, if a centrist one, and who will be France's youngest president ever. And much of the vote he did capture may have been more attributable to a dislike of the anti-Europe Le Pen than an embrace of Macron's message, as this Bloomberg News story noted at the time. How that youth vote broke down is a pretty good proxy for the country's main divisions and an indicator of the enormous challenge ahead. Far-left candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon did better than Le Pen among the 18 to 24 age group in the first round. In part this was because of the Bernie Sanders-like appeal of his socialist economic message and in part because many young people were repelled by Le Pen's pledge to take France out of the euro. In the second round of voting, the older the voter, the more likely he or she was to vote for Le Pen, so that seems good for Macron. However, Le Pen still received 40% of 25 to 34-year-old vote. That must be seen as a cry of desperation from an age cohort that is old enough to be realistic about its prospects. Politically, young people tend to veer between apathy and radicalism. When they bother to vote at all, young people in America and Britain have largely stuck together recently. In Britain voted overwhelmingly to remain in the European Union, 75 to 25 for the 18 to 24-year-old age group. In the U.S. presidential election, 55% of voters under 30 voted Democrat, down from 60% in 2012. Donald Trump got 37% of the youth vote. But this election was essentially a tale of two youth populations in France, roughly speaking, those who have options in life and those who despair. Around a quarter of French aged 18 to 24 are unemployed, more than double the overall unemployment rate. France's balkanized labor market, where the lucky have ironclad permanent contracts but a growing number have part-time or temporary work, hits the young hard. The average age for obtaining the first permanent work contract rose to 28 in 2016 from 22 in 1992. Education also lets down the young. France has a rigorous selection system. Those who land in good schools and make it through the early stages go on an academic track, followed by jobs in the private sector, as likely in a county where 1 in 5 workers is employed by the state government. But it is brutal on those who fall by the wayside, as the brilliant 2013 book La Machine à Trier, or The Sorting Machine, explained. Some 20% of primary school students fail to acquire adequate mastery of basic literacy and numeracy skills, and dropout rates are too high. Polls show the French pessimistic about their education system and how well it prepares students for the world of work. Apprenticeship programs have increasingly been a route to skills and employability in Germany, Austria, the UK and elsewhere. President Hollande promised that no apprentice is without an employer, and no employer remains without an apprentice. But France's apprenticeship system is excessively centralized and mind-numbingly complex, and seems to serve best only those who don't need the positions to succeed. In a paper for the French Council of Economic Analysis, Pierre Cook and Marc Ferroxi noted that while enrollment numbers for apprenticeships rose between 1992 and 2013, the rise came almost solely from those with higher levels of qualifications, while the proportion of apprentices without prior qualifications fell to 35% from 60%. But, you might note, inequality in France looks a lot less stark than in many other countries, including the US, that is true but also deceptive because the country has very low levels of social mobility, more in line with the rates in the US or the UK than the Scandinavian social democracies to which it is often compared. Parental earnings are a depressingly good indicator of an offspring's prospects. The barriers to social mobility, particularly education but also the labor market and even the structure of public housing, will continue to drive frustrated voters to Le Pen's National Front if nothing changes. And the National Front may get better at attracting them. Shortly before the first round of voting, I visited the leader of the National Front's highly organized youth movement. With his prep school polish and quiet confidence, 23-year-old Gaëtan de Saussay, a former philosophy student, seemed an unlikely poster boy for Marine Le Pen's movement. He said, with the air of someone who has to repeat himself a lot, that the National Front has many supporters like him. May have made it through the selection machine that is France's education system or found employment, but came from humbler roots and see the system as fundamentally flawed. The National Front's fundamental devotion to its populist cause would not be changed of an electoral defeat, he was convinced. We in the National Front don't seek to serve the markets, he said. We just want to serve the people. We feel the economy and finance should serve the goal of the policies, not that policies should be at the service of the markets or finance. To de Saussay and his cohort in the movement, Macron is not a reformer. They will be looking for ways to do to the new president what voters did to the party of François Hollande. So will Mélenchon, who remains popular among the young. And yet young people are nothing if not changeable. Maybe they can be wooed back to the mainstream. But it will take actions this time, not just words. At an elaborate ceremony at the Élysée Palace in Paris, he said his presidency would give the French back the confidence to believe in themselves. He vowed to see the EU reformed and relaunched during his time in office. He takes over from François Hollande, whose 5-year term was plagued by high unemployment figures. Mr. Macron was proclaimed France's new president a week after his resounding victory over the National Front's Marine Le Pen, with 66% of the vote in the runoff poll. The former investment banker, who had never contested an election before and only formed his centrist movement a year ago, has vowed to shake up the country's political order and reinvigorate its economy. Tight security was in place across Paris for the ceremony at the president's official residence, with hundreds of extra police on patrol. France has been under a state of emergency since terror attacks in 2015 and a large section of the city center was closed to traffic all morning. During his inaugural address on Sunday, President Macron pledged to restore the confidence of the French people in their country's future. The division and fractures in our society must be overcome, said the centrist politician. The world and Europe need more than ever France, and a strong France, which speaks out loudly for freedom and solidarity, he declared. He said he would convince the people that the power of France is not declining, that we are on the brink of a great renaissance. Speaking later during a visit to the capital's town hall, President Macron praised the way Parisians had responded to terror attacks. He said that rather than hide behind barricades, many had opened their doors and offered help because the face of Paris is the face of France, that of a living fraternity. He also promised to strongly support the city's bid to host the 2024 Olympic Games. He was presented with a chain of office once worn by Napoleon I, as a symbol of his position as Grand Master of the Legion of Honor, a title usually given to the leader of France. Before the inauguration ceremony began, he spent nearly an hour with his predecessor, who handed him the country's nuclear codes. It was Mr. Hollande who launched the new president's political career, appointing him first as advisor and later economy minister. Despite historic low approval ratings, the former president tweeted after leaving the palace, "I leave a country in a much better state than I found it." It was interesting to note how many rewords Emmanuel Macron used in his address. There was reformulate, reinvent, remold, rejuvenate, relaunch. And of course renaissance. It was all intended to reinforce the message that this presidency will be one of newness, youth and optimism. Mr. Macron is one of nature's optimists. François Hollande, the man from whose hands he took the reins of power, said that when Mr. Macron worked for him, he radiated joy. An almost preternaturally sunny demeanor, combined with his winning way with words, has been the new president's magic formula. But to hold presidential office is to walk a road of thorns. Rarely is the good news to smile at. Success, if it comes at all, may only be appreciated years later. Mr. Macron's resplendent personality is about to be tested like never before.